We're playing nice. And that is not what we should be doing 2 years into a genocide. We're playing by their rules while they are killing and massacring at a rate that we've never seen in history. And yet we're still playing by the rules, appealing to a bunch of politicians that we can't move. They're doing the whole Palestinian state as a distraction because they know their populations are angry and they're trying to give us slow bits to slow us down. We should be accelerating.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Visit sumudpod.com to subscribe and connect with us on social media. Consider supporting our work through a contribution on the Support Us page.
On this episode of the Sumud Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Ashish Prashar. From a youth prison in London to the halls of power, Ashish has carried a steadfast belief in second chances, justice, and Palestine. He now challenges FIFA and UEFA for allowing Israel to compete while Palestinian athletes are killed and sports facilities destroyed. And he is also holding Airbnb accountable for profiting from West Bank settlements, demanding dignity and accountability. Welcome to the podcast, Ashish.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. I know you are a supporter of the podcast. I know you follow us and you've been a big supporter. So thank you for that. Let me ask you really quick. Do I call you an alien of extraordinary ability going forward?
It's funny. When I first moved to the US, I couldn't believe that the title for the O1 visa, you know, the ones with exceptional talents, was called alien. Obviously, America would call it something like that. It's like, this is really funny. And I made it like a signature. And even though since then I've had a green card and a citizenship, I'm like, that's the best signature I've ever had and stuck with me all the time.
I loved it. I saw it in the email. I was like, that's awesome. That's pretty cool. So I want to take you back to November of 2023. You're on a playground or in a park with your young child, 18-month-old child at that point. You're wearing your keffiyeh representing Palestine. You think you're having a normal day, hanging out with your kid, and you're thinking maybe it was going to be peaceful. You immediately get accosted by a lady, and I'm going to hand it to you from there.
Yeah, like you said, it was a normal day. You know, it was a Tuesday morning. The only reason I remember it's Tuesday, it was election day that year, you know, like a local election day. So, like, you know, a lot of kids were off school. So we're in a playground where normally it would be school time. So all the parents who have toddlers were actually around rather than other school kids. And effectively, my son went into the basketball court and was playing with a kid who must have been about 7 or 8 at the time. You know how anyone who's got young kids, they love big kids. He's 18 months, he just follows them around. And the big kid was really cute. He rolled him the basketball. My son kind of tempted to throw it back. So I give him space, and she walks around me to confront me in my face. She basically said, do you support terrorism? Do you support Hamas? You know, do you know what they do? And normally, because I've worked in this work for a long time, you know, I've been in the envoys office and stuff, I have like a witty answer, but I think you hit it on your head. Like, you know, for me, who was already doing work related to Palestine at that point, being with my son's like an escape. I couldn't even compute what she was saying in those moments. It's like, what? Like, I was caught off guard. You know, she carried on verbally assaulting me and saying, we don't belong here, both meaning the playground and not here, because clearly, you know, the alien, to use your earlier expression. And you start berating me, you know, do you know what your people do? Do you know they burn babies in ovens? And I hope someone burns your baby in an oven. All this, hey, you know, you Arabs are dogs and all of that.
You can't tell me what to do.
You and your son go away.
Why?
Yeah, you cannot take any.
What?
You cannot take any pictures.
Look.
Get away!
I'm gonna do that. No, come near me, love.
Don't take pictures
If anyone
of me.
else is gonna say anything,
Don't take pictures of me.
I've got a baby.
Get away!
I've got a baby. Huh?
Trying to help. I don't know what you want me to do.
Is anyone else gonna say anything?
I'm sorry that happened.
I'm wearing a scarf and I'm getting attacked because apparently I'm a terrorist.
I'm like, okay, this is insane. So I just, you know, basically told her to go away a couple of times. It is what it is, you know, like, so I went towards my son and she's still berating me from across the basketball court. So she's berating and like telling us to go. And like, I don't know if it's morals or principles or something. My son's enjoying his time here, so I'm not going anywhere. And I thought, okay, let me go grab my phone. And I don't know why I did that, because when I'm playing with him, I tend to leave it with the stroller or with my coat or whatever. And I don't know, by a rational human being, I thought if I hit record, she's going to go away. She might say a couple more things, but you'd like to think someone doesn't want to be on video doing something crazy. And it just made her angrier. As people who have seen the video have seen, she kept telling us to go away as she's coming towards us. We don't belong here, you know. She told me a couple times like she's Jewish, you know, and we don't belong here. And I was like, okay, let's see where this is going. So she comes storming towards us, and I pick up my son at this point, like his head's here. And she threw her phone at him, and I basically ducked this way. The phone went that. And I slid him behind me, and I don't know why. His instinct. I can't pretend to anyone. I had a plan. I knew what to do. I just put him behind my legs, and she threw hot tea where he was. So, and it missed me. It clipped me. Only reason I knew it was warm is when the cup burst. Like, you know, it predominantly went behind me, but I could feel the heat. She attempted to literally burn my son. Like at that point, she hit me a few times. Tried to grab my phone. Went past me to get hers, which God knows where it went. Hit me a couple more times. It only stopped, I think, because somebody finally came up to the fence of the basketball court. And even then she was there, she was leaving, screaming about us not belonging there. And, you know, I've had so many reactions of how I handled it and not moved my ground and stayed calm. A lot of people say it's fight or flight, but you didn't either. Instinct, I don't know what it was. You know, I think the biggest thing for me was, I know as a person of color, at least, if we did get in a ruckus, the first person they put cuffs on is going to be me. I know no matter what happens to me, though, the only person who needs to be okay is my son. And that's the only things in my head that I know were going through my head. I can't tell you anything else was going. It was just basically staying calm, so nothing happened to him. And that was all that really mattered.
And what happened to her afterward? Was she arrested?
She surrendered eventually because of the public. I'm an abolitionist. I don't really believe in the police. I don't really believe in our prison system. Lots of reasons, my own personal journey through that. I reported it to the police because of my son, right? Because in my head, I was thinking, what if I'm not in the playground next time, right? And she recognizes my kid and she's with a grandparent or my wife or whatever, right? So I did it for him, really. But then I did what I knew best. You know, I'm a former press secretary, I'm a former diplomat's aide. And the first thing I did was call a friend of mine at a major network in the US and said, so I got attacked. My son and me got attacked in the playground. We reported to the police and they were going to take the story. But then I was like, I also have half the incident on video. And they put it on the 10 o'clock news that night. And I posted the video the next day. Honestly, I just wanted to catch her to hold her accountable. I have a really complicated relationship with the justice system, prison and all that. I always think about, like, I'm not Palestinian and I wear a keffiyeh. People who know me know I've worn it religiously since 2012 for lots of reasons, because I worked in the West Bank for Middle East envoys office. And I just thought, well, she's willing to do that to me. Who else is she going to hurt? Right? So she has to be held accountable. Her face has to be known. She has to be ostracized. She has to be isolated. So what ended up happening was almost like a neighborhood manhunt. I can't even express to you. The video was watched millions of times. I wasn't expecting that. Moms in our neighborhood put up wanted posters. Anyone who knows New York, they went from Fort Greene Park to Grand Army Plaza. There was posters on the lampposts. They were taken down by city and someone still put them back up. Like, it was insane to see such, I mean, that's New York, right? It has moments of such beauty. And I think it was literally because no one could believe she would attack an 18-month-old at the time. And I think it just brought a little bit of what was happening in Gaza home. And I think one of the things I tried to do on TV through all of that was just remind people, this is what's happening to Palestinians daily. What happened to me was, while scary and crazy, a microcosm of what they experience. And I think it gave a lot of people insight to, I would believe, Israeli thinking about, like, children. And, like, when you dehumanize someone that much, my son is nothing more than a target to her.
Yeah.
And she was arrested because she surrenders, thanks to the public who kept looking for her. They found her address. They found it. People saw her in the street, called 911. Like, it was insane to see the public mobilized to do this. And I guess you're the first person to know this. She actually was eventually, after nearly, I guess it would be 18 months since the incident, she eventually pled guilty to, I think, third-degree assault as a hate crime. Now she's doing stuff in the community. She has to see people. She has to work with communities impacted by the justice system. There's so much work that she has to do, which is almost like a year's worth of work to prevent herself going to jail. She fails to do any of this, she gets sentenced to jail. Now, people go to me, well, she should be in prison. It's complicated, right? I don't think prison's going to help her, but I do think her life was turned upside down in a way she will never recover from. She can never work in New York again. She was a nanny. She can never work in New York again.
She was a nanny,
She's a nanny.
and she did that.
She's a nanny
Oh, wow.
who did that to my child. And, you know, I would argue the community and delivered justice. You know, I lived on DeKalb Avenue with loads of restaurants, and I was lucky enough that, you know, I know a lot of the owners, and, you know, we frequent a lot in the same places. There was posters in them like not to be served, you know, all these things. Like, she lived only apparently about half a mile away from us, and I found out where she lived. She could not leave her house for a year and a half. She couldn't find work. I know all this stuff from the DA and everything. And she's completely isolated. There was effectively a boycott on her, like in her life in New York City. She's been punished, you know, if you want to call that. And I hope for her there's healing, because, you know, like there was a lot worse that Israelis have done to obviously Palestinians and other people, but probably Palestinians and the children. But like, prison in New York was not going to change her. And, you know,
They should have made her wear a kafia for like 6 years,
Yes.
just to really learn it.
yeah. And look, it's complicated. Again, it's like, I know everyone's degree of justice is different. And my hope is like, I know that her life has been turned upside down in a form of accountability that, like, I still understand today she cannot go to a lot of places.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you reported it first, because there are a lot of situations where she could have reported it and automatically you would have been assumed that you were guilty and you were the problem. Of course, we would find out the truth later, but you would have to go through that trauma of possibly being arrested or then barging into your home with your kid or something to that effect. So I think it was the right call to speak up immediately. Just curious, really quick, last question about that. How many people were in or on the playground watching?
Handful of people, and no one wanted to do anything. You know, it was one person who walked up quickly, who saw it from the street, who charged over and was like, if anyone who's watched the video, you can hear someone at the end saying, "Are you okay?" And that was an anti-Zionist. Yeah, this is a crazy world that we live in. An anti-Zionist Jew who walked up to the fence and was the only person who intervened, not other people who I would say I have more kinship with, maybe naturally.
Yeah.
But I also understand, I want to cut for context, like a lot of nannies and people who don't have the privileges would sit there, you know, who are black and brown, and they don't know what's going on, and they are in charge of someone's child, and I don't blame them. So there is a lot of reality checks in those moments of privilege.
So you showed self-awareness, patience, a high level of emotional intelligence. And I wonder if you actually learned that sort of resilience, if you will, during your time being in jail as a young man. I think you were 17 years old, and I believe you were arrested for stealing something from a department store. You've spoken many times about the guards testing your patience, even maybe the inmates testing your patience. Did that trigger anything for you at that very moment?
Yeah, I think anyone who's experiencing justice system, the goal isn't to just hurt you while you're there. The goal is to keep you there, both physically, quite literally, because if you have altercations, the likelihood of your sentence being extended is always on the table, but also mentally. They want to like break you, so then you're always in prison psychologically. When I was 17, I did something stupid. I stole some stuff from Harvey Nichols in London. I was sentenced to a year, which was insane when I think about it. Like when I look at the justice system, I'm like, oh yeah, that's where my color plays a role, right? Like there are people who do a lot less and a lot worse and get nothing, including this woman in New York's community service for assault, right? But in prison, I don't know what it was. You know, I'm not ashamed to admit the first day I was sentenced, it was like an out of world experience. Like I probably cried all the way to prison and in my cell all that night. But the next day when I woke up, and I don't know what triggered it, but I had to be a completely different person to survive this experience. And if I didn't do that, I probably would have broken in prison. But I just like, it was, again, it's like instant. It's something that kicked in that goes, you need to change who you are as a being to survive this. I was assaulted by guards. I was once pinned up on the wall and hit. And they're looking for you to respond. They want you to like fight back. I've been called all sorts of racial derogatory terms in prison. You know, I had my stuff taken away once for no reason. I was thrown in solitary confinement for my protection. As most people know, solitary is basically torture. And while I was only in there for a week, it's still like crazy isolating. Solitary taught me patience, taught me how to get through all sorts of life events. It's taught me the value of time. It taught me like, you know, the most valuable asset we have is time, right? It's linear and like kind of make believe, but at the same time, how you use it is really important, and how you treat it is really important. It's helped me value humanity in a way that I think is really important for people to understand. Yeah, how people talk about Mandela doing time in prison. I think people who go through that value humanity more than people outside in the real world. And I'm not just saying people don't care about other people. You understand what life being stripped away from you looks like. And it's followed me through all my work. There are decisions that came after that were only because of that experience and understanding what being connected to yourself is.
Yeah, when I was learning about that experience, it really felt like, wow, although it's a horrible experience to be in prison, it almost prepared you for that very moment on the playground with that lady attacking you. So, you know, things happen for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And we learn from it. I do want to take this opportunity to mention two things. Number one, this carceral obsession in the West, where the first thing to do is just arrest folks or imprison them, specifically brown and black folks, right? Which is a major issue. But I also want to mention that what you experienced is very similar, not as bad probably though, as what the Palestinians are experiencing right now.
It's the same. I mean, detention without any knowing when you'll ever be released. I mean, that's what they put Palestinian children through. Look, we have to understand, like, the model for prison also, like, is a Western idea. Like this concept that, like, the only way to solve for crime and the only way to solve for things going wrong is to lock people up, right? There is cataloged history of the way we deal with these sort of things in communities from all over the world, other societies before colonization, which kind of made everything the same, right? So, like, this is the only solution. We're the only people who want to lock our children up. We sell that model to the world. The other reason communities can't even remember what they were like before colonization is because they've adopted all these things, right? Like prison is the only way to solve for like theft. No, it's actually dealing with poverty. You know, all these things that have chosen to be normal aren't actually normal. You know, one of my most life-changing experiences is going to Sierra Leone and watching them through my work in the UK government and diplomatic work deal with post-reconstruction after civil war. They had one of the largest amount of child soldiers ever in a civil war. And instead of banishing them and instead of locking them all up after the crimes they committed, I mean, they are literally war crimes, but they were abducted, drugged, and forced to do things against their will. If that happened here, they'd be in jail. And in the US, I would argue in some states, executed. Sierra Leone made the choice to heal. And we call ourselves civilized. They made the choice to give them time to come back into the community, to put them face to face with the people they had committed crimes against, families they'd committed crimes against, and heal. Real reconciliation. In one case, which did change my life, was watching someone who took the life of this couple's child. And his life is now given to that family to pass judgment. And their response was to ask for him to be released into their care.
Wow.
How do we call ourselves civilized? We lock up our children for theft. We put them in solitary for theft. What Israel does to children, we know it's documented, is torture. But the West doesn't bat an eyelid because we actually do torture our children. You look at some of the cases in New York, Khalif Browder, like solitary, beaten every day. Like, yes, what Israel does is 1,000 times worse, but that's also happening kind of in American prisons, just not documented the same way. We're not civilized. And maybe if they didn't go through a civil war, I don't know how they would have treated that. But they chose to heal a generation of children that went through traumatic events. And we choose to put our children in prison for the stupidest shit. And instead of addressing the societal problems why they're in that place, we literally give up on them. and create a generation of harmed individuals who go through trauma in prison that makes them deal with things they should never experience. And God knows, and obviously it is documented, what Palestinian children go through in the West Bank. Through my work there, I mean, it's beyond, you've heard people like Josh Paul talk about this, where we put a Palestinian NGO on their watch list because they've reported Israeli crimes against Palestinian children in prison. But we cover up the torture, abuse, rape of Palestinian children. And we know this and we accept this. We're letting other Westerners in Israel do this to indigenous people, indigenous children. So we don't value life, actually. My conclusion about the West is we actually don't value life, our society. Watching indigenous people all over the world and how they deal with trauma, societal collapse, civil war, and when they're left to their own to deal with it afterwards, that is civilization.
That's powerful. I did not know that story of the parents or the couple that took in the individual or the young man. Was it? That would never happen here. There's just no way.
It took me till Sierra Leone when I was on duty in a diplomatic world, that experience of watching, reconciliation of society for me to really start to open up about my record and talk about it, and trying to do work in my community back in the UK and then in the US, in New York, where I worked on abolition projects. And that was my timeline. But I think a lot of people after prison, I wanted a normal life. And I wanted to get on with my life and never have to deal with it again.
Well, you lived beyond normal life. I mean, you've worked for or supported Boris Johnson, Tony Blair, Obama, Biden, all compromised individuals when it comes to Palestine and many other issues. Any regrets or lessons working with those individuals or supporting those individuals?
It's funny, that list is crazy, of course, now I think about it, and regrets probably all around. I don't know. I mean, I think, again, Boris was a result of my first boss, which is really fascinating to me. And as a young staffer, to be in those privileged halls at the time never felt like a mistake. I think when you're young, these things feel super exciting. Also, think about it. I'm very left-leaning. I grew up in an anti-apartheid family. And post-prison, my first job was with a right-wing newspaper. And that editor put me in the Conservative Party with him and took me on a journey that I wouldn't have had without him. I applied to work at the Labour Party in the UK. And they was sorry, we're not interested. All these little things that I keep as my mementos. And I always think, wow, life could have been different, but they didn't believe in justice reform, I guess. And they still don't. They're really, quote unquote, tough on crime now, similar to the Democrats in the US. And it's sad. But you know how you mentioned the craziness of my life? I've had moments where I've declared all the things, right? So I went out in 2008 after winning an election with Boris. I was do not vote for these guys. They're all racist. And left and went to the US to go work on the first Obama campaign. And I think a lot of us who did that really believed he was going to change the world at the time. I don't know, call it naive today, maybe. But back then, God, it was post-Iraq, economic crash both in the UK and the US. You wanted to believe that this guy was going to transform the world.
So which one's your biggest regret? If I could put you on the spot.
Biden, the consequences of Biden. It's interesting because people think it's Blair because I resigned publicly in the BBC. I knew what Blair was before I worked for him. I want everyone to not pretend that oh no, I didn't know what Blair was. I knew who Tony Blair was before. He went to Iraq. I worked for him after I came back from the US on the Obama election. He was just appointed the Middle East envoy. So for me, as a person who grew up in Europe, Tony Blair negotiated the Good Friday Agreement, which created a settlement in Northern Ireland after almost 100 years of conflict in Ireland about the northern part of Ireland, which, to be honest, should still be all of Ireland, which was actually a really revolutionary moment at the time. And then Iraq happened. And part of me thought he joined the envoy's office. And again, you want to always believe that there's some good intent here to fix his legacy. Because politicians have ego. You want to play into the ego that they actually want to fix their legacy, right? Go in there, try to do something with the peace process. But as history shows, because it's on the record how I resigned.
We'll talk about that really quick. How did you resign exactly?
I was on the BBC and I resigned, basically. I was the envoy's office is not committed to peace. I don't know what I'm doing here. And I'm announcing my resignation.
Wow.
I was the spokesperson for the team at the time. And yeah, there was no point of pretending. I watched my team ignore so many abuses in the West Bank. I watched peace talks devolved to Israeli talking points the minute we left the room. I mean, everyone knows this now, but back then, so many things that were like visually happening in front of me. And I was like, this is a joke. This is a crime. And I find it interesting that everyone focuses on the corruption of Trump and Witkoff, like when they travel the world to the Middle East. And, you know, I see all these stories about Witkoff going there to make money while we have these fake normalization things that are going on all over that. Well, guess what? They're not the first. You know, Tony Blair was in the Middle East going around making money while he's supposed to be there negotiating peace. You know, watching him go off to do other quote unquote private meetings, you know, maybe it's the con in me, right? Like I knew that was bullshit. Like I knew that these meetings were nothing to do with Palestine and getting a state. The guy's lining his pockets while we're here, supposedly negotiating peace and creating economic opportunity in the West Bank. It was ridiculous. But even with all of that, because of today, Joe Biden is by far the biggest mistake. I mean, I worked on his primary with his campaign chief of staff. I remember Trump was president, right? So everyone was like, let's rally around and try and get him out of office, right? So, you know, I worked for a guy who was a dear friend of mine, and we helped devise kind of that Southern strategy that you saw where they focused on Carolinas and everything else. And part of me is like, I wish we never did that. You know, the crimes that have come after, it's going to take a generation to figure out what's happened totally in Gaza. And he is the architect of that. And I want people to never forget that part, because it's too easy to move on to Donald Trump. It's too easy to move on to everything else. Biden and his entire administration should still be held accountable for that. And that should follow them to the end of the world. I watch what's happening right now, and my big worry, and I know Palestinians won't forget, and a lot of allies won't forget, but my big worry is that they're going to force it all onto Trump and Netanyahu and just try and give them a way out. And if people think I'm being like, oh, that will never happen, what happened to George Bush after Iraq? We're very good at it. We're very good at the water under the bridge, move on. You know, I always say Obama's biggest crime, the drones come up so much, but the biggest crime was never prosecuting anyone for Iraq. We know it was illegal. And the reason is we get Gaza today because we never prosecute someone for Iraq. If people were held accountable for that, both in the UK and the US, I think of Tony Blair, I think of Alistair Campbell, who wrote the dodgy dossier. I think of Nicole Wallace, who's on TV every day at MSNBC, who wrote the lies for George Bush, right? She's on TV. George Bush is painting. Obama should have put them in jail. That is the biggest crime he did. Because by doing that, we have Gaza today.
That's a great point. Never thought about that. That's a great call out. I want to go back to your work with Tony Blair. I know that you helped launch a micro lending project in the Palestinian territory, specifically the West Bank, obviously. If you could talk about that a little bit, that experience, because clearly when I read that, I was like, okay, this guy's trying to do good, but he's playing with shit being Tony Blair, but he's trying to do good. He's working with what he has. Talk about that program a little bit.
Before the world of Venmo and all the apps that we have today, there used to be something called microfinancing. People even wouldn't give money to the PA, and the European governments wouldn't give money because they were worried it'd be used for terrorism. That's still the same line that we still today, even with all of the PA doing their best to be complicit with Europe and America. They still couldn't get the deals out of Europe because Europe would be like, well, how do we know that funds are not being diverted to practices that, you know, were a threat to Israel? Me and the team that I put together created a program where donors could directly invest into funds that would create economic opportunities, basically, for Palestinian businesses. So the microfinancing would be delivered into this pot that they could withdraw from to actually develop their business, whether it be oil or whether it be like shoe business, whatever it was. We were trying to do something to actually help economies. Tony Blair kept doing things like more buses to Bethlehem. You know, that's what's going to happen. If we make more buses to Bethlehem, everyone's going to think the peace process is great. So, you know, we're like, oh, the solution to that is literally ending occupations. Not that difficult, right? Some of us who actually cared were like, it's a real simple solution to that, dude. You know, telling Israel to let in 10 more buses a year is not really the solution we're looking for, guys. So we went trying to develop something so we could get money and funds directly into Palestinian hands from Europe, predominantly, and then in America. So we created these like effectively mini banks that Europe would grant money to, like the European Union or member states, grant money to be used for certain projects. And it was pretty successful for like a year until, again, guess who shuts it down? Israel. So, people could use that money, no strings attached, to develop their business. They didn't have to report anything. They didn't have to show mass growth. They didn't show anything. It was about giving people a chance to thrive in the end. That's what it was all about. It was about giving people independence and chance to thrive. And the reason we focused on the economic side of it and not just the peace negotiations was with really a bunch of us didn't think the peace negotiations were going anywhere. So we were very focused on helping Palestinians in their daily life because our boss wasn't that great. It was weirdly based off a paper I wrote when I was working for the Conservatives about peace through finance. And it was a strange 20-year-old's vision of wanting to do this, but they were like, actually, it's a really good idea. Could you actually do this? Whether you get peace part is another thing, but can you deliver this program? Because actually there's some people who want to see it come to life. And we had some success. And anytime anything is successful, as you know, with the West Bank specifically, it gets closed down. So we saw a small growth. I wish I still had that, but I'm sure people could download it from our foreign office, because the beautiful thing about government records is we have to keep them. Well, in the UK we do. But, we saw something like 120 individual Palestinians and businesses receive significant funds for what they normally get from the European Union. And it looked good. It was real. People just want to be able to live. People just want a chance and want to be able to thrive, take care of their family, their children. Same things you and me want, that's it. That's really all they want. Project got successful and it was closed down. And honestly, that wasn't even the reason I quit, which I can tell you later. But that to me was a damning indictment of the whole envoys office.
Were you living in the West Bank?
I was traveling between there and the UK.
Did your philosophy on Palestine or your views change while you were there?
I grew up in an anti-apartheid family, Mandela, Arafat, all that stuff. But my views on Israel changed being there. I think naively, again, you grow up in the environment you grow up in, you want to believe that both sides do want some settlement. Being there in 2010 to 12, I knew that Israel had no desire of a settlement. Well, they desire settlement, excuse the pun, but they don't desire Palestinian liberation or freedom and being able to have their own state at all. They were making settlement deals while we were there. And what was very visible was the apartheid. Occupation was obviously visible, but apartheid was visible. It's the checkpoints that everyone's talked about. It is being in a car with your Israeli officer driving us as diplomatic officials, telling us that this road has been sanitized. What? Who are you telling us that? So I asked, what does that mean? Other people won't say that back to them, but they're like, we seal all the doors to the Arabs on this road, so they can't come on this. So people can't come out their front doors on this road. They have to go out another way to get on the same road that, the occupation can use freely. They're not allowed out, even though it's their front door. So they have to find their way out of the house. Sanitized. Doesn't it remind you of Nazi Germany? These are the kind of terms they have used forever. This isn't new. The idea that this is post October 7th still baffles me that people still have that conversation in mainstream press. But, they've always used that term. And I think the thing that threw me over the edge was I was at a checkpoint. Can't believe that's even a phrase you use, but I was at a checkpoint. We're about to be waved through. And I watched a young Palestinian teenager, probably the same age I was when I went to prison. They were harassing him, 2 guards. And one of the guards took the back of his gun, hit him on his back and put him on his knees. We're supposed to report that, by the way. And my colleagues all turned away. And wow. I'm looking at my colleagues, as much as I'm looking at the incident going, and you asked about my prison experience. I mean, it just reminded me of all that I had experienced. It reminded me of trauma that I experienced, but also reminded me of the oppression that we treat as normal in our society in the West. But God, this is everyday life, and this boy was hit a few more times. I was like, so are we going to say anything? They were more scared of the driver than they were doing their duty and their job. The reason they're there is to stop that. And they look away because they care about being diplomats more than justice.
Or they're just cowards.
Yeah, but it's careerism as well. I think a lot of it's well, if I stay quiet, I'm going to be on this thing to being a UN ambassador one day, blah, blah, blah. The bullshit that you tell yourself to not do something. Yeah, they're cowards, but cowardice is that too. Staying in the job is cowardice, right? So later that day, I didn't sit with my colleagues. I was in Ramallah and had tea by myself at this restaurant. I forgot the name. And this woman basically told me I must say something funny. I don't belong here. And I thought, what does this mean? She meant the job. It's like I clearly was not happy. And as a gift, she gave me the keffiyeh, the very keffiyeh that my son and I were attacked in, the very keffiyeh that my son was wrapped in when he was born, keffiyeh that has meant so much to me since that day. Because the next morning I resigned on the BBC, probably more because of her than anything else. Because I felt like I saw someone soar into my soul and told me I need to do something different now. And
that's powerful.
Yeah.
That's
a
powerful.
longer conversation than that.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal. So you're going after Israeli football.
Yeah. I mean, look, this isn't to knock BDS. I don't want to come on here and say BDS haven't done a good job in this space. But red card for Israel is not going to work. Like, fundamentally doesn't work. And what I can say that BDS and red card for Israel have done over the last 12 years, created the environment for what we're launching to work, right? The mobilization of football fans you've seen all over the world, the messaging of like, you know, we know sports is an important pillar in culture to end this occupation, because like it does work. It does work. It went to South Africa and it will work. The problem with it is we're in a world where that campaign is built on the fact that the person at the receiving end of the protest is a moral human being. Like when South Africa were kicked out, FIFA was moral. Today, it's not moral. It's corrupt. I mean, you only have to look at what they normally do as corruption. It's corrupt as hell. And the guy at the top of it is best friends with Donald Trump. It's not to knock BDS. It's not to knock anybody else. The reality is that works great, but it has its limits. We've hit its limits. The guy at the top has already spent this last week, by the way, telling everyone how he was against bans and boycotts because he knows what's coming. The pressure is coming. But, you know, he has a World Cup in the United States. He's not going to annoy the president. He's not going to ban Israel or suspend it. So we got to think of another way. And I have to thank, this is going to sound really weird, we have to thank Russia for presenting this to us. What happened 2 days after Russia invaded Ukraine was 12 European nations boycotted Russia and their clubs. They threatened UEFA and FIFA with a boycott. And this is really important because UEFA and FIFA then 2 days later suspended Russia, as we all know. And they're so good at branding and they're so good at like sending the message, getting the release out, making sure everyone covers it. That what was lost in it was that 12 European nations created the environment for that suspension. Now, the only reason we knew about this is Russia appealed the decision in the Court of Arbitration. And they made people go on the record about how this happened. And they accused these nations of prejudice and bias. But what was revealed in it was the list of 12 nations that actually instigated a boycott. Well, fast forward to today, that is the path to victory. That is the path to getting Israel booted out of football finally. It isn't to appeal to UEFA. It isn't to appeal to FIFA. They're corrupt entities that care about money and their personal relationships with their equally corrupt president and everything else. And they're not going to move without economic consequences, without the game being disrupted, those types of consequences. They call it the integrity of the game. That is how they got rid of Russia in the end. And the Court of Arbitration basically supported that the game's integrity would be put at risk if 12 countries dropped out. So we launched a campaign to demand that, and this is the kicker, like we don't even need 12. European football is built on a handful of powers, as we know, big nations like Spain, Italy, countries that like have great global reputations, great leagues, legendary players. We need like half a dozen to 10 possibly to make this work. And the reason I think we only need that much also is because it's about disrupting the game and it's money, right? And we are targeting Norway, Belgium, Ireland, Spain, Italy, France, and now a seventh country in Greece. The reason we're targeting those nations is those populations have shown that they are on our side. They are pro-Palestinian. But a lot of those countries have seen union uprisings too. You've seen the dock workers in a lot of the southern European countries, even in France, have mobilized to support Palestine. Football stands in those countries have mobilized for Palestine. And that is really important. With bans on the flag, they're still waving Palestinian flags. They're still protesting. In Paris, Paris Saint-Germain are famous for singing Nous sommes les enfants de Gaza, which is, we are the children of Gaza. They've made that chant go viral in Europe. Fans all over Europe are singing it in different languages. That is power. And what we're doing is turning that power and anger. We need to stop directing it at a guy sitting in Switzerland who doesn't give two shits about us. We're going to direct that anger and power at football federation presidents in their countries. It's like the NFL commissioner. They run football in their country. And most of them have executive power, as in one person can decide whether they boycott Israel, whether they ban Israeli players. That's insane. The fact that we are not directing our power and anger and a movement at targeting those individuals is insane to me. You can't do 12 years of kicking Israel out of FIFA and think, oh, well, we've not had that result. And now it's genocide. They still don't want to do anything. And they keep going out on the record and saying they're not going to do anything and keep doing that and thinking you're going to get a different result. If those people who are advising BDS worked in politics, they'd be out of a job. Like, you've 12 years, you haven't won an election? What's wrong? And I know BDS is a long game on retail, a long game on oil. There's an actual accessible target in your own country, in Italy, in your own country, in France, who you can make their life hell, and they will have to do this. And the reason they're accessible also, these people aren't politicians. They're not Donald Trump sitting behind gates at the White House. They're not protected. They're not even the FIFA president who's sitting in neon Switzerland, miles away, not looking at your protests. They operate in their country. They drop their children to school. And the goal of this campaign is to make sure everyone in their country knows they are sports washing genocide. We are focusing all the anger of that country onto that individual. And on the day of launch, there will be publications in each country that say that this man has the power to stop our country playing Israel. Now, could you imagine you are like the NFL commissioner, and then you wake up to every news publication saying you are sports washing a genocide in your country? And in countries that actually care about Palestine, where they will mobilize outside your house and your office to make sure that you do something. And that's what we're doing. And we're using not just the public. There's football coaches involved. There is football players involved. There is other organizations in Europe. There is the Henry Job Foundation involved. They are also doing the dossiers on Israeli footballers who have served in the IDF. Because guess what? They have served in the IDF and they currently play on European pitches. They shouldn't be able to do that. There are other organizations that we've partnered with, the ADC in the United States and others who believe that this is the strategy to get Israel finally booted out of Europe. And it might not happen overnight when we launch. But what I believe will happen is if we continue that pressure. One thing I can tell you about someone who grew up in Europe is there is nothing like football fans. They are nuts, and they will let their voices be known, and they don't protest peacefully. And when they direct that anger at you, you will know it's directed at you. And we want to make sure that it's consistent, even after the launch, even after the initial wave. If they don't make a decision immediately to boycott, we will continue to make those individuals' lives hell. We need to change our tactics. We're too nice, right? I think about this in context, right? I've been in the UK for a couple of months building this campaign, and we're still asking a prime minister who's a Zionist to not sell weapons to Israel. Here's another tactic that I implore my colleagues in the UK to do. There's a department that sells those weapons. You can find out the 92 people, and I know the 92 people who work in that department. You should publish their names. They should be known to everyone in the United Kingdom that these 92 people sign weapons licenses that kill children. We're playing nice. And that is not what we should be doing 2 years into a genocide. We're playing by their rules while they are killing and massacring at a rate that we've never seen in history. And yet, we're still playing by the rules, appealing to a bunch of politicians that we can't move. They're doing the whole Palestinian state as a distraction because they know their populations are angry and they're trying to give us slow bits to slow us down. We should be accelerating. I've watched the flotilla. That is commitment. That is commitment. But I've also watched unions and people say, if flotilla is touched, we will strike and shut down Europe. Start now. Strike before the flotilla is touched. Because I tell you what, if you strike in Italy and Spain today, as that flotilla is sailing, Italy and Spain might send gunships to protect the flotilla because they care more about their economy in the end than Israel. If you strike in Greece, they might send ships to protect the flotilla because they don't want to go bankrupt, right? Why wait for the flotilla to be attacked or blockaded? Why wait for it to maybe get disconnected? I believe they might make this. But if it does go there, why wait? Why not strike now, break your economy, and demand your government sends gunships to escort that flotilla into Gaza and remove the occupation? We're doing it the wrong way. And the same thing with FIFA. We're doing it the wrong way. We attack the columns that are accessible. That's what we should be doing. There's presidents in each country that are regular human beings that will not like their lives being turned upside down. They will not like that every parent in their school knows that they are sports washing genocide and have the power to end it. That's the key. When you tell the world that they have the power, they look at them differently. It's not like, oh, you could have done this in a vote with other people. It's like, no, you individually could do this. And that's the purpose of what we're doing. We want to make sure that these 6, 7 presidents of these football federations' lives are turned upside down. And on that day, call on all Europeans to protest their federation, whether it be in Slovenia, Poland, Germany, and demand that they boycott Israel, boycott their club teams, and ban Israeli players from ever playing in Europe until the occupation is over, until the genocide is over, and accountability and justice is delivered. That is the only way we're going to see the end of Israel playing football.
So I have a colleague the other day that I was speaking to, and he was trying to book an Airbnb. And of course, I wasn't very happy with that. Can you let our audience know why that's a bad idea?
Well, Airbnb basically ensure the occupation still exists, right? So Airbnb legitimized the occupation, not just of the West Bank, or I think of Palestine 48 too, right? Like they legitimize Israel's existence, frankly. They are a company that everybody should boycott. It's basically Airbnb let out properties on stolen land, and in some cases, stolen property, like literally Palestinian homes that have been taken, and Israelis have taken them over, and they let those out. But more importantly, the settlement part is really key here. Israelis steal Palestinian land that has belonged for generations, millennia to Palestinians, and they build a house on it and rent it out to Americans and Europeans. By booking with Airbnb, you enforce the occupation. You legitimize the occupation. It's pretty much that simple. And in some cases, like I said, they've actually taken a Palestinian's home. I can't tell you, unless we have historical records, and I'm sure there are, if that Palestinian wasn't killed for their home. Like, you literally have blood on your hands if you book those Airbnbs, right? And then the issue with like using Airbnb globally is you continue to support that. Now, Airbnb once was going to do something about this. They were appealed to by Palestinians about this, and then they were called anti-Semitic and the same tropes that you see. They caved to the ADL and other organizations. So they decided, and this is why it's really bad, to put all proceeds from those properties into disputed territories projects. Now, when you say disputed territories, you are basically saying that's actually not Palestine. Like, you literally are helping Israel's further occupation of Palestinian land, further theft of Palestinian land. And you do that knowingly. And this isn't just like, oh, the Israeli arm of Airbnb. Everyone from Brian Chesky down knows this exists. And they have blood on their hands. And they are making money from the proceeds of war. They're making proceeds from war crimes. That is basically it. And that's why Airbnb should be not just boycotted in the occupied 48 and the West Bank, they should be boycotted globally. And here's the thing, if they are held accountable, this isn't just a civil case, by the way, it's a criminal case. They're being held accountable for making money from war crimes. Like, that is like an international law case. And their executives are culpable for that. So this isn't a case of just going, oh, well, they're going to pay a fine and go away. No, the goal of this case is to see them in an actual criminal court and have executives put away for making money from war crimes. Why is this case so important? Well, firstly, not just boycotting Airbnb and making sure that they suffer the consequences like we've done for so many brands through BDS. It's important because it could lead to a full BDS. The idea that executives and their companies can be prosecuted for war crimes is going to make a lot of other businesses that operate in even occupied 48 think about why they're there in the first place. Is it worth the risk? Think about all these big retailers. Why am I going to risk this? Do I want to risk going to jail? So this case is super important because it gives legal precedent to go after businesses across the world. Why this case was super important is also because what followed was Francesca Albanese's report, which targeted all the businesses that enforce and allow the occupation to exist. She called out technology companies, retailers, oil and gas companies. They're all, if this case is successful, open to war crimes charges, right? And that is why she was sanctioned. It wasn't just because the report is damning and it shows that what we already know, apartheid, occupation, all that stuff. It showed all the money that is being made from this. It showed the American part of this too, which is this is why they are partners and deliverers of this genocide. They are making a ton of money from it. And businesses in America are thriving from it. Google and Microsoft have made a ton and are testing weapons, the infrastructure behind those weapon systems, whether it be clouds and everything else. And she exposed all that. So she's sanctioned because of all that work to put in front of the American and global eyes all the businesses that we treat as like our daily items that we use. She showed the world what they really are. And that is why they went so hard for her, because they want to close the door on any future prosecution or any threat to those entities that effectively support the Israeli and American economy. That's why I think everybody needs to boycott Airbnb right now, because you can not just economically damage them. You can send a signal that the war crimes that any of these businesses are doing can be held accountable. We're not going to drop a case because they suddenly pull out of there. We want to make sure we see it through. So executives are put in prison or seen charges, at least charged with making proceeds of war crimes.
I got to say, Ashish, this is such a compelling conversation. I hope you will do round 2 with us at some point, if you don't mind. How do we support your work and everything that you're doing? Because I'm sitting here and we all have a role to play, but in the US specifically, if you're in the US, what's the first thing we should be doing?
Well, on the Airbnb case, boycott Airbnb. It's that simple. And let them know why you're doing it. When you disconnect your account, you take money from war crimes. Brian Chesky should know that he makes money from war crimes. While you do that, send him a message to his Instagram. These people still use that stuff and it affects them. So when you log off, make sure you DM them that you're doing it for that reason. It's not just about the business. They'll hide it from their bosses. When you cancel your account, make sure they know why, because they still use every platform. They're not inaccessible. And the more people that do that, the more they realize this is a problem. And then the FIFA campaign, look, America, the World Cup is yours next year. It is yours next year, and it will be in the United States. The final is in New York, New Jersey. And look, I saw this summer fans in Seattle and Portland with Palestinian flags, right? Mobilize and demand your football federation act. I know it feels like a long shot because America doesn't take football as seriously as Europeans. But you know what? The World Cup is yours, and you should be demanding that Israel is not represented, even if they don't qualify, by even having a flag there. You should demand that the United States Football Federation boycotts Israel and bans its players. And I tell you what, you should be proud right now in the United States, because one of the only footballers to speak up about this genocide is American, knowing the risk it is for him to speak up with the current president. His name is Yunus Musa, right? He is one of your best midfield players, athlete, a demon on the field. And yet he put out on his Instagram, be quiet when kids are sleeping, not when they're being massacred. Free Palestine. Not a European, an American is leading that. There's something revolutionary in us, and we should put that anger towards our football federation that one of our best players in the United States is speaking up. You got to represent that player and boycott Israel now.
I appreciate you, Ashish. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I do want to throw something out there. I think we're going to have to get a book about your life at some point. So if you don't mind getting started on that while you're doing a million other things, we'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.